منصة تحول، منصة ثرية بالإبداع، عزيزة بكل عزيز تطوع ليغني مبادرتها في طبع أثر يوجهنا نحو التغيير الإيجابي. بوافر من السعادة يسر فريقنا فريق اللغات والترجمة استضافة الأستاذ والمترجم محمد رشيد. أهلا وسهلا بك، محاضر في جامعة الأنبار من العراق. أهلا وسهلا بك، فلتتفضل أستاذنا.
Thank you very much. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation and thanks to Tahawul team for this opportunity to meet you in this lecture entitled The Difficulties of Translating the Cultural Concepts, which is considered one of the most difficult problems of translating any text, especially the literary ones, which is found in the differences between cultures. In other words, when the cultures are similar, there is less difficulty in translating. But when they are different, it is often very difficult to find equivalent lexical terms, or lexical items having the same cultural connotations. So, according to the above, the translation between languages of disjunct cultures is more difficult than carrying out translation between languages having the same culturally related in meaning. So, the first point, I would like to shed light on the meaning of culture. Here, I depended on the new Encyclopedia Britannica, which is defined culture as the integrated pattern of human knowledge, belief, is the way of life of people. It consists of conventional patterns of thoughts and behavior, including values, beliefs, rules of conduct, political organization, economic activity, and the like. Thus, when the word culture is used nowadays in ordinary daily conversations, it is often associated with the higher things of mind or the product of high civilization, such as art, literature, music, or philosophy. As we said in Arabic, that الثقافة, or the person who is, as we defined him or her in Arabic, الشخص الذي يعرف شيء عن كل شيء. So when a person is described as cultured, what is actually meant is that he is one who is familiar with the finer things produced in civilized life. In other words, one who has refined tastes in music and the arts, a highly educated or a well-read person. The translator has to decide when the translator deals with a specific text, he has to decide the importance of certain cultural aspects and to what extent it is described or necessary to translate them into the target language. The aims of the source text will also have implications for translation, as well as the intended readership for both the source text and the target text. Then there are many aspects that we can say they are very important in discussing the importance of translating cultural concepts, which are the translation and culture. The translation from one aspect and its relationships with culture. One of the most challenging problems, as more and more translators have come to realize, lies in the differences between cultures. Sapir and Worth, as you know, the linguistics scientists, say no language can exist unless it is steeped in the context of culture, and no culture can exist which do not have at its center the structure of natural language. So any translator wants to deal with a text should take care or should take into consideration the cultural concepts and deals with them carefully. An example explains these points can be found in my project of translation, which is entitled Under the Ashes of the Blitz, from Arabic into English, to get the degree of higher diploma in translation. There is a phrase in Arabic, لكي تقر عين إسرائيل وتنام آمنة مطمئنة, which may lead the translator to render some culture-specific features in a literal way. In this way, he will miss the cultural significance of the target language text. So it is rendered to give Israel a peace of mind. In many cases, like the above mentioned instance, big dictionaries do not always help out very much. Neither states that values for it is quite impossible to deal with any language as a linguistic signal without recognizing immediately its essential relationships to the cultural context as a whole. So, to summarize the analogy employed by Jer, it considered to illustrate the relationship of language culture as the translator in the same way that the surgeon operating on heart cannot neglect the body that surrenders it. So is the case of the translator who treats the text in an isolation from culture. Some linguistics compare the relationships between language and culture as the newly born child. If this newly born child is taken out from the social environment in which he was born and transplanted in an entirely different one, certainly he will walk in this view or in this new environment just he would do in the old one. On the other hand, his language will be completely different from that of his native environment. It is due to the fact that a human being is not only born by nature, but also in a society which will stamp him with its traditions, customs, and even beliefs. Seemingly, language cannot exist apart from culture, or rather from the socially inherited that constitutes the text of our lives. So, here, let us see what Yoel Aziz, how he divides problems of culture into 5 classes, which are geographical, religious, social, material, and linguistic. And he takes every point of those 5 problems of our case and discuss them, each one differently. So the first one, which is cultural equivalence. According to Aziz, the idea of cultural equivalence is to look for the expression in the target language, which I mean Arabic, which is used exactly the same context to give a meaning that is perfectly identical to the source language, which I mean English expression. This procedure is considered the easiest one, most popular and idealistic for dealing with the cultural terms, since it is available on the target language. For example, the British Council performs the same functions of المركز الثقافي, cultural center. Likewise, Parliament, which is mean مجلس الشعب or مجلس الأمة and المجلس الوطني. Another example is as beautiful as a lark, أحلى من القمر ليلة البدر, or أجمل من البدر, have the same context and the function in both source language and target language, according to Ghazali, 2006. Sorry. Cultural correspondence. The source language cultural terms could have exactly and literally the same correspondence terms in the target language. For instance, meat pies, فطائر لحم. Or another example, to hit 2 birds with 1 stone. يضرب عصفورين بحجر. However, this shows that there is a perfect cultural correspondence that can be traced between Arabic and English. In other words, عناصر مشتركة. Specifically, the levels of collocations, idioms, and proverbs of cultural origin. The other one, or the third one, is accepted standard translation. With the information technology area, some English cultural terms have become established and are perfectly understood as standard terms. In Arabic, especially in fixed phrases such as idioms, proverbs, collocations, and metaphors. For example, the end justify the means. الغاية تبرر الوسيلة. Another example, software and hardware. برامج الحاسب ومعدات الحاسب, or برامج ومعدات الحاسب. spare parts, which means قطعه غيار. These examples and many others are important from English into Arabic and have become a part of standard and everyday Arabic according to Ghazali 2006. The fourth one is naturalization. In this process, the term is originally English, but when conveyed into Arabic, it is naturalized. In other words, it is adapted to Arabic grammar, spelling, and pronunciation. For example, Olympics, which means الألعاب الأولمبية. Jawava, which means الجوافة, and Heracles, which means Hercle. Because of the consonant interaction among people and cultures and their effects on one another, many examples can be found in both Arabic and English, as well as in all live languages all over the world. Therefore, this procedure is regarded as one of the most popular and successful procedures of translating culture. An example of Arabic words that have been naturalized and transcribed into English, including jihad or hajj, jubba, which are all of them Islamic terms. The other aspect is the general sense. This procedure ignores the cultural charge of unsourced language terms, perhaps because there is no cultural equivalent to the target language. For example, Congress, which means Majlis Nuwab, is translated into the sense with its cultural implications of a special parliaments in the United States being disregarded. This is due to the fact that there is no cultural equivalent in Arabic. For this term, however, الكونغرس الأمريكي is well known in Arabic. Another example is salad mixture, which can be translated into its general sense in Arabic to طبق المقبلات, to include not only salads of different kinds, but also any kinds of dish or food taken as a starter. The sixth one is transcriptions or transference or transliteration. It is easier, most common, as well as most frequent procedure among all the translation procedures of cultural terms. In other words, it preserves all the source language original cultural flavor regardless of whether it is unclear or misunderstood in the target language. For example, jeans. The word jeans is translated to its or in the process of transliteration into Arabic word jeans. Hamburger also is dealt in the same way, and kung fu. Many examples could understand these, but others may not understand. For example, Elysee, the presidential palace in Paris, and cricket, which is a sport game. All these examples show transcriptions might sometimes be the only resource in translation. To clarify a transcript terms, the translator can use a classifier, a translation coupled, tribal, explained in a phrase, sentence between a practice in the translation, or in the footnote as a last boring restore. The second one is the literal translation of meaning, Since it is the literal translation of the meaning of individual words of a term or an expression, this procedure is easily applied. It is sometimes unwillingly applied to translate a special cultural term that has to be understood literally, such as in the target language. For instance, harvest sabah, in Arabic, عشاء الحصاد. Bluff man, lunch, غذاء الفلاح. Fork lunch, غذاء الشوكة. These meals are special in the source language and have no Arabic equivalents. Retaining them literally in Arabic may indicate their cultural flavor and to give an idea about some English-specific meals. So we arrive to the eighth one, which are translation coupled, which means a combination of two translation procedures as a means of solving a cultural problem satisfactorily. For example, internet translation and transcription. كاليش، الكاليش عربة بغطاء قابل للطي. Transcription and paraphrase and explanation. كفتان، transcription, paraphrase and explanation. الكفتان لباس تركي طويل من الحرير. Acid rain, here translation and naturalization, which are مطر أسيد. This procedure is considered conventional. It is bring about comfort and satisfaction to target language readers and contributes to their knowledge of foreign cultural expression. The ninth one, it's translation triplet. It combines the three procedures at the same time. Although it is frequent as the coupled, it is equally logical, valid and favorable. For example, or for instance, pasta dish, which is mean طبق مكرونة الباستا. The three elements, which are translation, naturalization, and transcription. بالمول، شارع بالمال في لندن. This procedure is mostly used when a translation coupled is not satisfactory or more details are required for one reason or another. Classifier. It is one kind of translation coupled used to explain unknown cultural expressions in simple general terms, explaining its class, type, category, etc. Due to its practically and applicably, this procedure is regarded as the most important and the best among the others. For example, Lincoln, which means مدينة لينكولن الإنجليزية. Rock, as you know, موسيقى الروك, and steps, سهل, steps الروسي. In these examples, the cultural terms are transferred into Arabic with modifying words to explain or show their types as well as the class, category, field they belong to. It is sufficient for leaders and replaces the long, boring style of footnotes. Here we come to the 11th aspects, which are naturalization. It is a kind of functional and descriptive equivalent. It takes the form of paraphrase in the target language without reference to any source language cultural feature. In other words, it is a type of deculturalization of a cultural term to become nominalized and naturalized in the target language. For example, Westminster مبنى البرلمان البريطاني كاتش 22 في حي سبيس في ورطة كبيرة أو في مأزق لا مخرج منه. Can of worms مشكلة أو يصير. Here the naturalized or neutralized version of the former example is understood by the vast majority of readers instead of Westminster, which is possible but might be unclear for most readers. The other one is componential analysis. It is a type of paraphrase that can be described as more precise and sometimes more economical than the paraphrase and the glossary procedures. It is considered the analysis of the semantic components of words. For example, high tea. High tea means وجبة الشاي. شاي plus كاتو وبسكويت plus جبنة وطبق مطبوخ. Arts Council مركز الفنون منظمة وطنية لتمويل الفنون في المملكة المتحدة. Continental breakfast فطور أوروبي شاي وقهوة وخبز المحمص, which is some people call it toast. These terms are given descriptions for each of its components in brief details to be perfectly clear in Arabic. It seems necessary for the Arabic readership in order to understand these cultural terms. Other aspects is paraphrase. Paraphrase is a type of short explanation. It is relatively interchangeable with explanations. It is used when there is no other way to illustrate the unclear cultural terms in a translation. For example, Tilbury عربة خفيفة مكشوفة. سيلفا غابة الأمطار الاستوائية. شافينا شافيان أسلوب الكاتب برنارد شو الساخر. Since there is no clear and specific equivalent in Arabic for these terms, paraphrasing is required to make the Arabic readerships understand them. It would be vague if they are rendered literally. Other aspect is translation label. Translation label is a procedure which is considered a type of justification for the use of risky temporary version of translation. It is a reference to conditional temporary translation suggested for the first time and not standardized yet. It is includes between square practice or quotation marks, inverted commas, to indicate its conditional and translational nature. It can be used for referring to a translation that can be changed or improved on later. For instance, satellite TV channel, قناة تلفزيونية فضائية or قناة فضائية. Fax, which means بريد سريع أو ناسوخ أو بريد مصور أو براق. However, it is considered a type of tester that might prove or disprove the suggested translation. When it is approved, it will be standardized and recognized in the target language. But when disapproved, it will be forgotten and a new version will be suggested instead. بريد سريع is imprecise because it has no relation to fax. Function machine, thus there should be an alternative term that could be improved by users of Arabic. The last one is deletion. This procedure does not mean to delete the whole cultural terms altogether, but sometimes a word or an item of the source language cultural expression can be deleted altogether because of its being unimportant to the target language readers. For example, computer الحاسب instead of الحاسب الآلي. As swift as an arrow كالسهم or مثل السهم instead of أسرع من السهم. Christmas عيد الميلاد instead of عيد ميلاد المسيح. Nevertheless, a cultural term can be deleted completely if it is insulting or taboo. That's to say bad. Otherwise, it is unadvisable to have a complete deletion, especially when it is required to be translated fully for a certain reason. This procedure, however, is limited in use and confined to those terms which can be perfectly comprehended in the target language after deleting a word or two from each. It is possible when the source language term become popular in use. I want to complete this lecture in order to shed light on the collocation and its relationships with translation, but here Miss Muna asked me to end this lecture here because the electricity problems. I hope I can meet you in another lecture in order to discuss the relationship between cultural concepts and collocations and their use in translation. Thank you very much. I hope I will meet you in next time. Thank you very much.
طبعا كنا بنتمنى يكون وجودك أطول من ذلك أستاذنا، ولكن ظروف نتمنى أن نلقاك إن شاء الله في لقاءاتنا القادمة حسب مواعيدنا مع جامعة الأنبار في العراق إن شاء الله سنعمل على إعلان الكتاب الرسمي الخاص بفريق اللغات والترجمة وتعاونه معك. شكرا جزيلا لك وشكرا لحضوركم، نأمل أنكم قد استفدتم. إلى اللقاء القريب إن شاء الله.